So I'm your chair for the next hour. I'm delighted to be chairing this session with IMPOWER and with Kate, and I'll get people to introduce themselves. So I'm Debbie Barnes, and I'm Chief Executive at Lincolnshire County Council and the Children's Lead for the County Council Network.
Hi, I'm Kate Dexter. I'm Assistant Director for Family Help and High Needs in Norfolk County Council.
Good afternoon to you all. I'm Dominic Luscombe and I lead on children's social care for IMPOWER.
I'm Jonathan Rallings, Senior Advisor at CCN, who's been working with IMPOWER and my wonderful colleagues in counties to actually develop a report based on this presentation.
Great, thank you. So we want to do a bit of a presentation to share with you how value in care has been implemented into a really big local authority. And we think it provides a really important framework for ensuring that we have the right conversations with the sector around placements for children and young people who need to come into our care. The sector is under massive pressure. I don't need to tell any of you that. You'll obviously have read the recent CCN report, which reiterates the pressure that the sector is under. And we think that this framework provides a really important framework to engage with the sector, to articulate at an individual level what the needs are of our children and young people, but as importantly also provides us with the ability to be able to strategically engage with the market and identify strategically what sort of needs our young people have, so that we can begin to have a strategic conversation about what we want the market to look like in terms of placements for children and young people. Hopefully this session will spark off some interest in terms of how you could utilise the framework, but also really would value a bit of a conversation at the end as well around what this framework can offer regional care cooperatives as well as we move forward. So thank you. I'm going to ask Kate to share the findings of how it's been applied in her authority, and then afterwards Dom is going to talk to us about what the information strategically is telling us around the needs of children and young people. So over to you.
Thank you very much.
Slide.
Yeah. Thank you. So value in care. What is value in care? For us, it's an approach that allows us to really understand what care needs children have and the best way to meet that need. It helps us to tailor that care and support package for young people. It also helps us to track changes in need over time, and it enables us really to plan for the future, not only for individual children, but for cohorts, for whole populations. So it's got a number of different applications. Most importantly, it gives us a holistic picture of what children need, and it helps us to really understand what strengths they have, what are their ambitions, but also what do they need in terms of their care provision. It's a really helpful way, really, to allow us to look strategically at the needs of the children that we have to look after. So in Norfolk, we've been on a bit of a journey, really. In 2018, we wanted to look at transformation in a new way. So we've been on a transformation journey for many years. We had new leadership coming into children's services at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. We needed to change the way we were working with looked after children. We recognised that we didn't know what the needs were of our looked after child population, and we didn't know whether the care and support that we were providing was effective or not. So for us, we really needed to understand what our children required and make sure that we had that clear correlation between what they need and then what we're providing. But we also needed a system-wide approach. We had a difficulty with culture in Norfolk, where looked after children were regularly discussed in terms of risks that they presented in terms of their own behaviours. And so we wanted to shift that culture and start talking about children's strengths, children's needs, and outcomes, most importantly. We needed to look at our placements for children. We had an increasing financial pressure, we had too many children in our care, and we needed to understand exactly what we should do in order to progress that work. And so for us, value in care has enabled us to really start to understand the connection between what children need and what we should be providing in order to meet that need. It's helped us to improve how we work with looked after children and care leavers. And it's given us great intelligence in terms of our sufficiency strategy, our commissioning strategy, and our wider kind of transformation of services for looked after children in Norfolk. It's also enabled us to really change our narrative. So they are our children. We are their corporate parents. We focus on the parent element rather than the corporate element. And it's enabled us to really think about what next for our children. So we've been on quite the journey in terms of our looked after children. You'll see here that we obviously have been thinking about our educare services, making sure that we're doing everything we can to support children to remain at home with their families. We've worked very much around that early intervention and our targeted early support. But looked after children was the next step for us. And so we've used value in care to help us to understand what our children need. So what placements do they require? What does each individual child require in order to meet their need? How do we match them effectively with carers? But also, how do we match carers effectively with our children? Because it's a two-way process. It's enabled us to really think about what it means to be a foster carer. And we focused on fostering in a slightly different way. We've use value in care to enable us to really target our support not only for looked after children, but also for the people who look after them, whether that's an in-house foster carer, a fostering agency, or a residential provision. And we've made sure that value in care is embedded in every part of our service. So it starts when a child is going to become looked after, so before they're even looked after, and all the way through their life as they journey through care. This has really helped us to ensure that we've got the right approach for our children. We've seen a shift in the culture. The focus very much now is on outcomes for children and how we approach it. It's enabled us to look at timescales differently. It's enabled us to look at cost differently, and enabled us to ensure that we're spending our money in the right place and that the right children are in care. So it's also helped us to support children to go home when it's the right thing for them and target our support services. It's enabled us to meet the needs of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, which previously we were not able to look after effectively. We didn't have many unaccompanied asylum-seeking people in our service. That's changed significantly. We have a whole county service now for our unaccompanied asylum-seeking people. And it's also enabled us to really start to develop longer-term strategies that are more cost-effective, but also improve outcomes for children. We want our looked after children to have the same opportunities and the same outcomes as their peers. So we've made a number of changes for our looked after children, but we went a step further with our fostering service. We transformed our services for foster carers. We've introduced therapeutic services for looked after children, therapeutic services for our foster carers. That's as a direct result of the intelligence we've received from value in care. It's enabled us to really understand what are the key areas for children that we need to focus on, and emotional well-being is one of the greatest. But we then decided that actually we needed to change how we work with our foster carers and how we remunerate our foster carers for the really difficult work that they do. And for us, the most important thing was to base children's outcomes and children's needs at the heart of that. Not presenting behaviours, not the risks. Most people will know that often placements cost more when children are having a difficult time, when they're going missing, if they're involved in exploitation. Value in care enabled us to start talking about what they actually need and what their hopes are for the future and what our hopes for them are for the future. And so we changed our payment structure to focus very much on the outcomes of children. And we focus really on what is the impact for people, for foster carers in looking after our children, and what skill set do they need? And is that well matched? And if so, remuneration then follows. It's not been without its challenges. It's tricky making something, changing something so significant, particularly with foster carers. They work very hard, they have a difficult time, they have a really clear view. But it was worth it, and we're on a different journey, a different path now with our foster carers as a result. Our foster carers now talk about outcomes. Our foster carers now talk about wanting to meet the needs of adolescents who are struggling, meeting the needs of young people coming from other countries that they don't know. They want to look after our children with disabilities. They want to fill every bed within their provision. And that's really been important for us in terms of sufficiency. But actually, they're getting more out of their journey as foster carers, and our children are seeing massively improved outcomes. We took the chance, actually, to change our framework with independent fostering agencies at the same time. And we brought them in line with our in-house approach. We were seeing many placements with same day, next day breakdowns happening. You know, we were seeing placement costs for our independent fostering agencies escalating over time. Well, that child's doing X, so therefore we want you to pay Y. There really wasn't any foundation for that, except that that same culture we'd seen in our county, we were starting to see with our independent fostering agencies. So when we changed the payments for our in-house carers, we also made the decision to cap fees with independent fostering agencies and completely retender our framework. It was a risky business. We were worried we would lose really important fostering agencies that we need, that are looking after our children. But actually we saw a number of agencies choose to come and work with Norfolk who weren't previously, because they knew what we were wanting, they knew what we needed. They liked the culture and the approach we were taking, and they recognised the value of knowing exactly what fee will be paid for a different individual placement. That has really helped us to focus on our number one goal, which is family-based care for every looked after child in Norfolk. We're not there yet. I'm not saying that we've got all the answers, but we've definitely seen a significant shift. This just gives you a sense of some of the great intelligence that we receive from Value in Care. So we can plot an individual, we can plot a cohort. So for example, you are 16, 17-year-olds as they're getting ready for adulthood and we're starting to think about transitional placements. It can tell us about children with a particular need. It can tell us about children with a particular focus. And this was so helpful to us at the beginning and has really helped us all the way through, because it's enabled us to really get underneath what we need to be thinking about as a local authority. I think what's been interesting working with all our colleagues across other counties is that the patterns are often similar, but actually you'll see a spike in need in different authorities for different things. And I think that's about what frame of services you've got in place, what other options you might have for your children. But I think what we've all found, and certainly this was the case for Norfolk, is what we paid for a placement had absolutely no correlation to the need of the child that that placement was looking after. And so for us, that's really helped us to start to reframe our sufficiency strategy and how we commission and how we approach placements for children, and all importantly, how that's impacted on our funding. So talking then about some outcomes and some of the impact of using Value in Care. For me, one really, really important statistic is that we've seen a 12% reduction in the average length of residential placements in Norfolk, and that's since 2021. That continues to improve year on year. We've seen placement stability also greatly improve as a result of this approach, and the services that we designed and deliver as a result of using Value in Care intelligence. The changes in our fostering approach have really helped us. So we've seen 11% reduction in the average placement for a standard placement with our independent fostering agencies. And in-house, really excitingly, in our first year, we saw a 14% increase in utilisation of the beds already available to us. So approved foster carers using the bed space they've got, and a 30% increase in new carer capacity in Norfolk. So whilst in Norfolk we don't focus on in-house foster placements being the priority, it's about family-based care. That's really important to us, that we continue to build new capacity rather than IFA carers coming over to a local authority or vice versa. It's really helped us to identify those opportunities for reunification and step down from residential care to foster placements. And we now have a really well-embedded, robust approach to children returning to their families. People will know that research shows that the majority of children who go home to their families often bounce back into care over time. We're not seeing that picture in Norfolk. We've broken that trend now. And the data and the understanding and analysis that the Value in Care approach has brought has really helped us to achieve that. And I've already talked about the strategic and operational planning that we've been able to do as part of Value in Care. So I'll hand over to Dom.
Okay, thanks, Kate. It's been a real pleasure to see the work grow and develop in Norfolk over the last few years, and I think you can be really proud of the impact that you've achieved. As I mentioned, I lead IMPOWER's work on children's social care, and for those of you that don't know IMPOWER, we work right across local government and health with a focus on improving outcomes for local people. So over the last few months, we've had the opportunity to work with CCN and a group of local authorities to use and apply the value in care approach in a number of different ways. We've been able to bring together a unique set of data on needs and cost for 3,500 children. And that represents 4% of England's care population. And in summary, our belief is that this insight could be used to support local authorities to face some of the challenges that they're dealing with around children's social care. And we think that some of the impact that we've seen in Norfolk could be replicated at a local, regional, and even national level. So before I come on to this, the context will be familiar to many of you as leaders in local government. But just as a recap, the County Council's network found that 6 in 10 local authorities will struggle to balance their budget for 25-26. And we know that 45% of that budgetary pressure relates to children's social care. And as you'll know, that's driven by an increase in the number of children that are entering care, but a reduction in the number of children that are leaving care, increases in complexity of need among many children and young people, significant rises in provider costs, and that's all compounded by challenges around regulation and challenges with the workforce. So what have we discovered through using value in care, and how do we think that could help the sector? So the first thing just to say is a bit about our sample. So we've included 3,500 children within this exercise across 4 county local authorities. And the total weekly spend for those children is 4.7 million, which is 2.3% of the total local government spend on England in children's services. And one of our first key findings here comes from the comparison of need and cost. And so we can see this scatter graph plots all of those 3,500 children based on their total level of need and their weekly placement cost. And what you can see first off is that there isn't a correlation between need and cost. And that helps to evidence the hypothesis, really, that it's market factors and sufficiency which are driving the significant increases in costs that local authorities are experiencing. And it also confirms what we already know, that there are a lot, as Kate referenced, there are lots of children who are in the wrong care for their needs. And the Josh McAllister review identified came to the same conclusion and found that a third of children in residential provision could be in foster support with the right support and intervention. But for the first time, really, this is evidencing all of that based on need, based on actual needs of children, using the value in care approach that Kate described so well. And it allows us to dig deeper into this in a number of different ways, which we'll come on to. So we can also see that it's a small cohort that's disproportionately driving a high level of cost here. So 10% of children within our sample are representing 51% of the overall expenditure. And through this analysis, we looked at if a rebalanced system allowed us to, for the 7% of those with the highest cost, if it allowed us to support them with placement supporting comparable levels of need, we would see an £800 million saving nationally if those findings were extrapolated across England. And again, we can see really significant differences here between in-house provision and external residential provision. So the green dots are private providers and the orange dots are in-house provision. And what you can see here is that for similar levels of need at times, we've got very significant difference in cost between in-house and private provision. You know this, of course, but I think it just helps to evidence that hypothesis that we know it's market factors and sufficiency that are driving the high costs that the sector is experiencing. And one of the things that a number of the local authorities we've worked with have been able to do is to use this sort of insight to drive the development and investment in in-house provision, and Lincolnshire would be an example of that. But we can also use this insight in different ways to affect change, and that's really been the focus of the work on value in care in Norfolk and a group of other local authorities over the last few years. So we've worked with over 15 authorities to use and apply value in care in different ways. So this coming back to our scatter graph, which shows us need compared to cost. What we can see here is that there are a cohort of children over here that have relatively low needs, but a relatively high weekly placement cost. And in a number of the authorities that we've worked with, that insight has driven delivery of programs around step-down and reunification. And Lincolnshire, again, is a good example of that, where Lincolnshire colleagues have used this insight from Value in Care to support 45 children to step down or be reunified with families over 18 months with a saving of 5.8 million. And we've worked with other authorities to use and apply Value in Care in a similar way. But more importantly than that, it's also driven improved life chances. As Kate said, we know that family-based care is better for the vast majority of children where that's achievable. And you can see at the other end of the spectrum, there's a cohort here of children that have high needs but a low weekly placement cost. And that tends to be children who are living in foster care with very high needs. And some of the authorities we're working with at the moment are using this intelligence to try and preempt a risk of placement breakdown and use this intelligence to drive and mitigate preventative action. So while this data can show us can help us to step children out of care or down from residential to fostering, it can also help us to understand the impact of care on needs over time. So Norfolk, for example, have had Value in Care for a few years now, and it's completed at every looked after review. So you start to have that real-time intelligence around how need is changing over time, and then think about how we can use that intelligence in different ways. And so what the analysis tells us across the 4 counties, across the 3,500 children, is that more time in care has a detrimental impact on children's needs. Again, perhaps not surprising, but being able to actually evidence that with analysis around need for the first time. And there are a multitude of factors at play here, and I'm not going to go into those. But I think it serves to strengthen and support arguments for preventing care entry for children wherever that's achievable, and also for stepping children out of care, again, where that's possible and achievable. Another key finding here, again, perhaps unsurprising, is that a third of children in our sample have very high levels of need around emotional health and around emotional attachment and emotional regulation. And so at a local level, this sort of intelligence is starting to be used by local authorities and partners to think about commissioning at a strategic level. And you can see actually how a shared set of intelligence around need across different cohorts of children within the population can be the basis for planning and commissioning across ICBs and local authorities and other key partners. And indeed, Norfolk, I know you've been progressing that, and Lincolnshire as well. And you can see how this sort of intelligence and information could start to support a regional approach to thinking about need and thinking about commissioning. And that is exactly the thrust of the report, the recommendations in the report that we've been developing with CCN. I know the conference, there's been a lot of discussion and a number of sessions looking at SEND, understandably. An interesting finding here is that based on our analysis, having an EHCP means you're more likely to have a higher level of need and a higher weekly placement cost. And similarly, if you've been excluded, the same applies. And again, we've been working with a number of authorities to try and use and apply this intelligence to support local SEND programs and local inclusion programs. So I'm going to pause now. In early December, we're going to be publishing a report with findings and recommendations based on the work that we've been doing to date, alongside CCN and alongside the other authorities that have been involved in providing this data. So our hope and aspiration really is that we can use this intelligence at a local level, but also at a regional level and potentially a national level. I think we're quite clear that regionalisation alone isn't necessarily going to be the silver bullet that perhaps, apologies any DfE colleagues in the room, but I think that actually we do think that there's an opportunity to use and apply this sort of intelligence at scale. And actually, if groups of authorities could coalesce around shared intelligence around need and cost and how need changes over time, that could really help to radically change market management at a regional level and replicate some of the impact that we've seen locally with some of the authorities we've supported. Again, I think there was talk in the Stable Homes Built on Love government strategy around a national framework. We feel that actually a national approach to understanding and codifying the needs of children and young people could be a game changer in terms of how we engage with the market, how we engage with providers, and how we get the best care for children. And finally, we think that actually having this sort of data on needs and cost could help to support stronger evaluation of the impact of care and also of the value that it offers to children and to local authorities. I'm going to hand over to my colleague from CCN, Jonathan.
I'm not going to say a huge amount. I'm just going to give enough time for Lucien to go and get a roving mic so that we can start a bit more of a debate among the room. But I think I just wanted to basically say I was lucky enough to witness a presentation on value in care in the spring by Kate and Dom, and to see them talking about this. And there were two things that struck me immediately. One was what a success story this is for counties, because counties, this is not work that's just begun a year or two ago. This is counties looking forward from the middle of the last decade, seeing where these trends were and actually trying to combat them then. And it's now expanded, and it's obviously gone into many other local authorities and not just county authorities. But the other thing that really struck me is just the pertinence and the relevance it has to the government's Stable Homes strategy that was published earlier this year, their key document responding to the McAllister review and their plans for reform. And I think there's three key areas. Those of you who are familiar with Stable Homes will know it's split into 6 different pillars of reform. The pillars that are most pertinent when you're looking at it would be Pillar 4 and Pillar 6. And the 3 areas that I think are covered within those pillars that this relates directly to. One is, as has been mentioned by Debbie and Dom, is commissioning. I think we've all got our views on how far regional commissioning coalitions will actually work. But at the same point, if we're starting to speak more language, and if we do need to move forward in that way, this can be a really helpful way of operating with other local authorities in a regional area to be able to actually manage that market. And I think just the whole impact of how we would be able to wrestle back a little bit of control from this broken market, as Dom's slide puts it, could be really powerful within there. I think there's something really salient about the early intervention implications for this, and everything, Kate, that you were talking about there about being able to be better at predicting placement breakdown, to be able to get those placements there in the first place, also to be identifying those children who might be at need, who might be coming into care, and work with multi-agency partners. So I think there's something really important that can come out of this there. And then I think the final one is the government is pushing for a national framework, and there's also a lot in Pillar 6 about how we need to improve our use of data in order to actually make sure that we have a more efficient children's services system. And I think this is a prime example of that in action. And again, it's a success story for counties. So that's one of the reasons why, subsequent to seeing that presentation, I think CCN have been really keen to work more closely with IMPOWER to do the sort of data analysis that IMPOWER have produced here, to actually start seeing what are the trends that value in care is showing. And we are delighted that we have got this report. This is a preview session to give you a little bit of advance notice of this data, but do look out for it. We're going to be publishing it at the beginning of December. It will be emailed to all chief execs, leaders, DCSs, etc., so that you've all got sight of it. And hopefully you can get an understanding of the journey that Lincolnshire, that Norfolk have been on. And hopefully also we can get it into the hands of government for them to actually take a look at this and see what learning can they draw out of it. Because as Dom says, if there's the potential for £800 million savings, I didn't necessarily think that in my time as the social care advisor here at CCN, I would see our release before an autumn statement being about the pressures on children's services as opposed to adult services. It's normally always adult services, but I think it's really symptomatic of the times we're living in that it's very clear that's what we've had to lead on this year, and that's the point that we need to be really hammering home to government that is going to ultimately be the biggest pressure that puts you at risk of Section 114. So again, this is potentially a piece of the jigsaw in solving that. So I'm going to hand back to Debbie, let it go out to the audience. I think we have a roving mic ready, and look forward to having a debate.
Yeah, really look forward to questions, comments, and your views around what you think of the framework and how it could be applied. I wonder if you'd be able to, if you've got a question, if you could just introduce yourself, say where you're from, and then we'll ask people to respond. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Really interesting presentation. My name's Councillor Laura Mays. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills at Wiltshire. I just wanted to know, by doing this new way of doing it, have you increased your number of in-house foster carers, and have you reduced the number of foster carers you're using through IFAs?
We have increased the number of in-house foster carers. It's an ongoing challenge because we're losing them out of the door at the other end as the new ones are coming in, but we saw a 30% increase last year. We're still waiting for this year's data, but I'm expecting it to be at least as positive again. We have shifted very slightly the balance between independent fostering agencies and in-house foster carers, but that's a continued work in progress. So what we're now working on is that 5-year strategy around in-house foster care, and we need the foundations that Value in Care brought us to do that. So now that we know that it's effective and we've seen early positive signs, that's our next step.
Thank you. Gentleman there, and then I've got the lady at the back there.
Hi, my name's Alan White. I'm the leader of Staffordshire County Council. I'm particularly interested in the early help and educare piece and what the data has told you about preventing children from getting into care in the first place. Because if we can drive our activities in the early help and educare space, it means that the expensive part of it, which is children in care, could be relieved. And I'm also interested to know whether or not you've managed, using the data, been able to identify any correlating factors. So, for example, traits that families and individuals exhibit, which could lead you at the universal stage to say, actually, we might need to get in here slightly earlier because I can see that there's going to be problems coming down the track. So a bit of a long-winded question, apologies, but the data is really fascinating and what it leads you to actually do to drive down those costs, which I think is an obsession of most of us in the room. Thank you.
I think Kate may want to start and then Dom may want to come in as well.
And thank you, Debbie. So what we now know, as you saw from Dom's slide, we have a really good understanding of children's needs when they first come into care, and then we can track their needs over time. That's enabled us to understand what our children are dealing with before they come into care. So we've been able to really target our educare services in a different way. So, for example, in Norfolk, our focus has been on adolescents, and it's been on meeting their emotional well-being needs and supporting them with making safe choices and safe relationships. We know that's the area that we're seeing when children first come into care. And we also know that it's adolescents that are coming in at a higher rate than we would want them to. So that's what we've been using to drive our educare services, and really we've been focusing very much on that earlier intervention, as you say, so trying to get in there at the very first point of a conference, child protection concern, even earlier if we can. And it's also enabled us to really focus on family relationships, because our data showed us that for children newly coming into care, family relationships were a particular problem. So it's helped us to focus on that area, and family networking and family finding, which is really great to see as part of the Stable Homes Built on Love strategy. That's something we've really focused on in Norfolk as a direct result. Earlier intervention is our next step. So we're not there yet, but what we're planning to do, probably somewhere in the spring of 24, is introduce a version of Value in Care for children who are not looked after that we can use alongside the traditional social work assessment. That will give us great data and understanding of how we start to work effectively in a much earlier space. Alongside that, we're also piloting a new version of family help model. So we've developed MDTs in 2 of our 6 localities in Norfolk to understand how different specialisms, not just that sort of social work perspective, but domestic abuse specialist workers, interventionists and others can really affect change. So that's probably our next step.
Yeah, I need to, just to build on that, what we'd like to do next with this is actually draw on the data for those 3,500 children, keep adding to that, and actually use the data from that to try and identify early indicators of the risk of care entry, both from the insight that we've got for children that are in care, and then actually the plan over time as well is to use something similar for children who aren't looked after but are at different stages in the children's system or prior to that. And actually, if we feel if we could have a similar approach in terms of identifying need at a child level and aggregating that at a cohort level, that could be a really powerful tool in terms of helping with our efforts around early intervention and prevention.
Great, thank you. Got the lady there.
Thank you very much indeed. My name's Tessa Munt. I'm the lead member for Children, Families and Education in Somerset. I wonder if I can ask you to flip a couple of diagrams back on your slides. I just want to understand something. It's that one. Now, I don't understand, and it may be something incredibly basic, what happens to young people who are in care for less than 3 months. It seems to be better if they're in care. Their needs are not so great after they've been in for 3 months to 1 year, and they're greater. Their needs are greater in less than 3 months. What's happening? Is that just the trauma? I just want to be really clear. I'm terribly sorry. I'm probably being very thick, but.
Want to go?
Yeah, no, I'll come in here. I think it's a really astute question, actually. And it's one that definitely puzzled us in Norfolk initially. Why are we seeing less need when they first come in and that increasing need over time? I think the first thing it shows us is something that we already know and that research absolutely is clear about, is that care is not a good option for children. Remaining within their family is always the best option if we can possibly achieve it safely. So I think this diagram really kind of shows that as kids are in care over time, we see a change in their level of need. Some of that is due to what they experienced before they came into care. But some of that change is as a direct result of being in the care system and the impact of being in the care system. So it will represent children who maybe have seen placement breakdowns, who feel they've been rejected by carers, those that have come from a family carer into local authority care. But I think the other thing that it shows us is that if we don't work at a really early stage on the right things, long before a child is indicated to become looked after, we will see that need, that trajectory over time of need increasing. So as Dom said, that development of indicators of what might lead to a child becoming looked after, this intelligence is really helpful for that. The other thing that I would say is transitions is really key. And I think the gentleman's question before about transitions, about that early intervention and what the data helps us to understand, this shows us too. We know that as children go through transitions in their life, whether that be friendship groups, a change in where they're living, a change in the network around them, or a change in schooling, all of that then impacts on their level of need and kind of readjusts what they need, but also the areas of need that we see for them.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, isn't it? Because I think, we all want to have a view that care is protective and will help children to thrive. And yet when you look at some of that data, it's a bit of a stark reminder, isn't it? That, if children can remain within their family home or with family as much as possible, then clearly that is best for them if it's safe for them to do so. I think I've got another question as well.
So can I just clarify
Yeah,
then?
sure, yeah.
So what that diagram says is that we need to focus really hard on those young people who are 3 months to a year because they've stabilised, but we need to get them out into the next stage. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've got a question at the back.
Oh, hi. Hi, Lisa Spivey from Gloucestershire County Council. A couple of questions. Picking up on that one, then, if all of our care is great, then when children come into care, will they not just do well? So is this an indication of the care provision itself at that point, or is it purely about the child? And then the second thing is that, it's fantastic to have these strategies and ways of working, but in our local authority, we simply don't have the staff to implement it, so we've got a huge lack of social workers. We have got a huge turnover in social workers. We have a lack of those with specialist training, etc. So, we could adopt this, and that's brilliant, but actually, how have you then managed to implement that with the resource implications and challenges that we face?
Debbie, can I come in on that
Sure,
one?
go on.
Because I think that there's something really interesting, building on what Alan was asking earlier on, about it's not just about getting data that can help inform you in an individual local authority. What you would hope is that this data can also inform approaches that we can employ on a national or regional basis to support your authorities. Now, I'm thinking particularly when I was at Bernardo's a few years ago, we housed the Female Genital Mutilation Centre. and some of you may have heard of that, but the reason that was set up was recognising that this was an issue that expertise had developed in certain pockets, in certain councils within the country that had faced this, but those similar problems were now occurring in further afield, wider places. So the idea of having the FGM unit was almost to have a sort of a specialist task force that could come in, like maybe, you know, Tower Hamlets could support a Suffolk, or, you know, sort of Leicestershire could support a Northumberland, and those sorts of things. So hopefully what you can do with data of this sort is you can start to identify and tell government, we actually need some specialist help in this particular area, or we need to actually concentrate on this particular issue. I think the other thing, we need to actually get more of this data and study it over time to unpack, you know, some of the trends like we're seeing there. But I think one of the things I'd add to what Kate and Don were saying on this particular graphic is remember that there are many different reasons why children come into care that may be skewing that. And actually, a child who comes into care because they've suffered terribly traumatic abuse, and there is basically pretty much no chance that they're ever going to go back to their family for whatever reason, whether their parents are in prison or died or horrific abuse, they're more likely to be in care that much longer, and they're probably more likely to have high need. At the other end of the spectrum, you may have kids who, you know, for instance, I'm sure you all dealt with cases during COVID where children had to go into emergency care for short periods of time because they had a single parent and that parent was hospitalised or what have you. So they're going to show up probably in the green or the red, but they're actually probably not going to have as many complex needs because they actually do come from a loving family. They've just had to come into care for a particular circumstance. So there's all these sort of things that we, hopefully, the more data we collate, the more data we can draw in, the more we can start to understand these trends, but in particular, then can reflect back to government and say, you know, that's half the point of this. This is where there's real need, and this is what we would really like, obviously, here in CCN, is to be able to actually cut the data by our authorities and say, this is what CCN councils need. These are the trends that we are seeing. These are what our councils, you know, sort of need to bring in, and we don't have that at the moment. And I think the FGM Centre is kind of a really good template for the sort of thing that we might want to be asking for in the future over many, many different issues that we start to see that we need in our particular area. Would you agree with that, Dom?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Kate, do you want to come back and...
Yeah, just to bring it down to a kind of local authority level, I think what Jonathan says about why children come into care is really, really pertinent. We're seeing more and more that only the children who need to be in care are coming into care, and so we will see a different picture from maybe 2-3 years ago or 10 years ago. What I would say is that valuing care was part of a culture shift in Norfolk. We had dreadful trouble with social work recruitment and retention when I took over in 2020, just before the pandemic. But with valuing care came a real shift to focus on what we can do to make lives better for children in care, to improve outcomes, that joint ownership, that joint accountability. And that is from our members, our leaders, and then our staff. That's really helped morale to really shift. And so now we don't have an issue with retention or recruitment for our looked after children. We haven't solved everything. We have challenges in other areas still, but it really does make a system change when you kind of make that decision. We're going to focus on children's needs and their hopes, their strengths, their aspirations. Staff really get into that and really on board with that, and we now have social workers coming from quite a distance wanting to work with our looked after children. I think the other thing we've done is introduced a multidisciplinary approach. So we don't expect our social workers to be everything to every child. Trauma-informed care isn't just about the children, it's also about our staff. So we've developed a service in Norfolk to support emotional well-being and that kind of holistic view to stability for our children. But one of the key elements of that service is they come alongside our staff and support them to help them to hold the trauma that they hear day to day, help them to support the young people, and give them the confidence that they need to keep going to reduce that sort of secondary trauma, that vicarious trauma that they might experience themselves. So we don't see that compassion fatigue any longer, or that burnout that used to lead to lots of workers leaving us. So we've really seen the shift. So I would say that this, while valuing care is an assessment tool, it's the culture and the approach that we set around it that makes all the difference.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that really from a Lincolnshire perspective, that's exactly what we found. Staff like to work with a strengths-based approach. They get to see what the positives that young people have got to offer, and it changes the culture and how they talk about their young people as well. So we've certainly seen that sort of staff morale, and so people want to work because it's a nice culture and environment because you can genuinely celebrate the children that you're caring for. And again, in terms of a multidisciplinary team, I think what this tool has helped us to do, we've been able to better articulate what training we need to give to our other partners. So, for example, we've done lots of work around life story work in schools, and so schools will now do work around life stories. Schools will do work around managing emotions, as well as our health visitors and our other partners. And although when you think about it, it's obvious that a young person is going to need some additional support around managing their emotions, emotional health. This helps to articulate it, and so that you can have an individual and a strategic conversation as well. I think I would say. This gentleman here.
Am I allowed to ask a second question?
Of course.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I'll caveat this. I've never been a children's services portfolio holder, so I reserve the right to ask daft questions. Here we go. So the educational psychologists who brief me on a regular basis in Staffordshire tell me that all children in Staffordshire have a level of need of some description. We just perhaps don't quite know what it is. Is it possible to take the average child and plot what they would look like on that graph? Because surely what we're aiming for is to get the children in care to have as normal a life as possible. And I don't know what that looks like if it was plotted on your bullseye target there. Is that a legitimate question, or is it just a straight up daft question?
No, Dom?
Yeah, I mean, just to start by saying, so the way that we developed valuing care as an approach and tool, you can apply it to any child, regardless of whether they're looked after. So the answer is yes. We can do an assessment of need for any child using this approach, and ultimately plot them on this graph in that way. Hence, I was thinking we could use it also for children who aren't looked after at an earlier stage of the journey, and have a clearer understanding of what need looks like for different cohorts of children, recognising we would expect to see lower levels of need across different domains for those cohorts of children.
I've got any more questions or comments or perspectives? I can't see any hands. I'll ask something. So I want to talk around, I suppose, get the panel's views about how this could be used in terms of regional care cooperatives. I unashamedly am nervous about regional care cooperatives, nervous about handing over such a significant budget and responsibility to a different organisation, and still fear that my DCS will be trying to ring somebody at 4 o'clock on a Friday to get a placement, and there'll be nobody at the other end of that phone. And so, I wonder whether this framework, if implemented across a region, I suppose enables us an opportunity to have a different conversation about what regional care cooperatives could potentially look like with the DFE. I'd welcome your views on that.
I would just say,
Jonathan.
When I mentioned and I said, responding to Dom talking about a broken market, you would feel that if all local authorities were articulating need in the same way, it would make it more difficult for providers to be charging different amounts of money, to different authorities, because they would have a very clear menu of, this is what need this child has, and this is what we would expect to pay, what have you. And I think that at the moment we're probably in a bit of a weak position with the monopsony situation that we've got, where there is only one buyer, what have you, and they know that we have to buy, but therefore, you can be easily gazumped by, say, a London borough or somebody else comes in. Well, if everybody's actually at the same level and actually cooperating and coordinating together, you start to sort of reduce the power that monopsony has on our budgets.
Yeah. The current bidding for the highest bidder for a placement just isn't right at the moment. Kate, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, this will absolutely help us frame things differently. So I guess we're thinking more about regional care collaboratives than cooperatives, where we come together as organisations working together to change the way things are. I actually believe we potentially have the right amount of care placements in the country for the children that we need to support and look after, but I think that we've got the wrong children in the wrong placements. In fact, my child's commissioner for specialist need will often say if you took every child on a post-it note and put them in the right placement, there wouldn't be an issue with sufficiency. What we found with the IFAs in Norfolk, by having a really clear, consistent approach to assessing need for children and what that means in terms of their day-to-day care, we've been able to reframe how we work with our independent fostering agencies. We have a cap on the fees that we pay, and if need changes, the fees change alongside it. But we're one authority, so while that works really well with IFAs, it's a whole different conversation when we're talking about external residential providers, and we know that that's where the greatest cost is. We know that's where the greatest number of placement breakdowns occurs. We know that that's where the challenges are. So I think that what we can do using value in care is it gives us that really consistent approach, that evidence base for why we're framing placement costs in the way that we are. That changes our whole conversation with external placement providers, and there's real power when you're all approaching it from the same perspective. But I have to confess, I'm not thinking regional, I'm actually thinking national. I think this should be a national strategy. I think if every local authority used value in care as the root assessment to understand the needs of the children we look after, and we all then said, this is the type of placement we need for these children, this is the fee we will pay, it would reframe the conversation with our provider colleagues, and it would change the way we approach the financial perspective. The other element, though, and we've done this in Norfolk with our unaccompanied asylum seeking and people, we took a real leap and we chose to take providers on as strategic partners. So rather than the kind of them and us, that really uneasy relationship we see between local authorities and providers, particularly of residential and supported accommodation provision, we chose to throw that out the window. And we spoke to our providers and said, this is what we want to do. We need your help to do it. Are you on board? Do you care about the kids in your community like we do? And we made that decision together, that we would work together differently. And so we never have a shortage of placements for our unaccompanied young people. We have affordable placements for all, and we have providers who actually want to work with us to meet the needs of those children effectively. But I truly believe that we can only achieve that fully with the care market if we do it together as local authorities across the country.
So I think that's a great challenge to the sector in terms of how we can embrace this framework nationally. I think that's a really good end to the debate. So we think it's a really important framework. We think it improves outcomes for children and young people. We think it enables staff to have a positive conversation, a really strengths-based conversation about our young people, make sure that our young people do have the right care, and also enables us to have a strategic conversation with the market as well. So we think it's got lots to offer. I thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and thank you very much to our panellists. And so can we give them a round of applause, please? Thank you.